award-winning environmental campaigner, author, speaker, and the founder of City to Sea. I was reading her book, How to Save the World for Free, and then I was really impressed by all the steps that she gave us, open our eyes, bring awareness to plastic pollution. Coincidentally, a mutual friend connected us, and I was expecting to meet her here in the UK when I arrived, but with the lockdown was not possible. But I'm glad technology is in our favor in these crazy times, and I'm very glad to introduce you, Natalie Fee. Welcome, Natalie. It's a pleasure, real pleasure to have you here, Natalie Fee. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Natalie, you are amazing. First of all, I just have to say that I'm a big fan of you. I read your book. So it was like such a big surprise and such a happy surprise. I would never imagine I would be here in the UK, same country that you are, in a lockdown, and being able to, hear some of your stories, get more immersed into your movement. And I would like to start this conversation, this very pleasant conversation with you today. What made you start to look closer to the environment, take action, and create your own movement, City to Sea?
To answer your question, I've been aware of environmental things for many years. I think I'm in my early 40s now, but when I was in my sort of late teens and 20s, I guess I started having, you might call like a spiritual awakening. And that for me was always interconnected with the environment. It seemed to be from a very young age, I sensed the power of the interconnectedness of life. So I think from quite early on, I had that affinity and a relationship with the earth and the different elements within earth. When I was traveling in South America and I saw firsthand the environmental destruction, the impact of big corporations on indigenous communities, the impact of mining and extraction, deforestation, I think that was kind of like the first time I became aware of like those big forces, not became aware, but sort of experienced them. The water riots in 2000. So I think those were kind of were sort of in my awareness. And then working more in the media, I was then sort of trying and shift the mainstream media to talk more about environmental issues. That wasn't really happening. So I then started up City to Sea in my spare time as a sort of volunteering, and trying to do something about the problem of plastic pollution. So that was the thing that really called me to act back in 2014.
Interesting. Wow. It's amazing how passions can drive us to just take us to different directions, like exactly what we want. And it's very impressive to see how dedicated you are. How can we educate the plastic generation? We are facing now a huge problem with plastic. Well, it's been happening for a while, decades now. But now with the lockdown, with the quarantine, people are just consuming more plastic. How are we going to educate the next generation?
Well, actually, I think the next generation is pretty educated and connected to the urgency of the problem around ecological collapse and climate breakdown, and of course plastics, it linked to those. So I think the younger generation are very switched on. I think the problem that we have is still the older generation and the links that we still have around capitalism, and well, profit making, really, and profit above planet. And I feel like that is very much the old paradigm that is hopefully in its death throes. So hopefully it's like that old paradigm is dying out, and the younger generation who are more aware and more connected of to purpose and to planet and to each other.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge when we think about education, because when I think of the new generation, I think of hope, but it doesn't exclude, of course, our relationship with plastic, our commitments to the planet, and how together we can find strategies to face it and change it, change habits, change our attitude and change how we consume, right? And supporting or not what is going on in the world. But for some reason, when I think about education, when I think about the next generation, I see some hope. But of course, that hope has to come from us, right? The ones who are giving example, the ones who are bring somehow inspiration and direction for the young ones. But considering the conditions we are living now and how challenging is to deal with the plastic now with the coronavirus, is this something that worries me, and I wonder how the future is gonna be with all that. That's why I ask myself constantly on how can education help the future? How can education help to create a new sustainable world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are examples of young people already changing the world and making great waves, like, Greta Thunberg, for example, an example of a young person who hasn't finished their studies, who's just like completely changed the dynamic when it comes to climate marches and awareness about the climate crisis. I think it's too early to say, like with the surge in plastics through coronavirus, of how it's going to end up. But I definitely think that the plastics industry is very powerful, and it's obviously been having a hard time over the past 5 years, because or longer, as people are becoming more awake to the toxic nature of plastic, right from how it's produced until where it ends up. So this has definitely been a moment for them, and there have been media articles and saying that this is the plastics industry are seeing this as an opportunity to win back the public's trust. But it's a dying industry. There's no way that over the coming sort of 10 to 20 years that governments eventually are going to allow those kind of polluting industries to continue, because people are going to stop voting for those kind of politicians and leaders that aren't prioritizing the planet. So I think, yes, education is a huge part of it, and around PPE, we need to educate people that it's safe to use a reusable, washable mask, and you don't have to use single-use plastics, and educate people that it's safe just to wash your hands with a bar of soap, that you don't need plastic sanitizer, or you can make your own refillable sanitizer. So definitely there is education pieces around that, like how to get your coffee cup refilled without the barista having to touch your reusable coffee cup. So lots of stuff like that is happening, and we've been doing quite a lot of that at City to See.
Natalie, I remember watching your TED Talk. I was so impressed, especially at the very moment you talk about the project in this island. When you see my favorite seabirds, albatrosses, completely full of plastic. They die because of plastic. How did this project started?
There's an American artist, and he went out to the Midway Islands in the middle of the Pacific to show the story, the plight of the albatross chick. So a third of the chicks are dying in their nests with their bellies full of plastic. So he documented it. He was creating the film, which is now out, called Albatross. But at the time, I just saw the trailer for the film on social media back in 2013 or 2014. And that was enough for me to motivate me to decide I wanted to do something about plastic pollution. So I share the clip in my TED Talk to demonstrate the power of sharing something on social media, or the power of telling a story through art. And you'll know, as a filmmaker, like the way he portrayed the albatross chicks and their struggle was so beautiful. Like the way he filmed it, the way he approached it, it was artistic. The score was incredible. So it moved you on so many levels, and he really transmitted, I think, the spirit of the albatross in that video. And I think people that were receptive to that, as I was unexpectedly, were motivated and mobilized to act. So I share it more because of it being the catalyst moment, rather than it being a project that we were involved with.
Do you think society is ready for change? We have seen so many evidences of what human race has been caused to the earth. Amazing action has been taken to avoid plastic pollution, movements, organizations like yours. But we're still having a big challenge ahead of us. And so nature is telling us things are not right when you think about climate change, when you look at ocean acidification. What do you think it has to happen to society to see actually a change happen?
Yeah, it's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, I think a number of angles. Most prevalent really is our government and leadership, and we're starting to see slowly, mostly from the female-led countries around the world, some really good, tangible action being taken. I think also at a local level, because we are generally so disempowered by having leaders that aren't prioritizing the recovery of the planet, and they're still engaging in the destruction of the planet. And when that's happening, if we're not able to sort of vote in the leaders that are going to make the changes, then obviously we have to do it ourselves and be the change. And there is a real movement of localization happening around the world. And I think that's something that people can get involved with and feel very heartened by, more connecting to their local communities, connecting to local food growing sources, connecting to local energy grids. And again, keeping it on track with plastics. If you're shopping locally, growing more food, then obviously you can use a lot less plastic in your life. So I think keeping up the pressure, showing the big corporations that we don't want to buy their products if harming the planet, showing our political parties that we won't vote for them if they're not prioritizing the needs of the planet, and then making sure that we are ourselves engaging in things locally to help build that resilience, because it's likely that things are going to get a lot worse quite quickly in terms of the global temperatures rising. And only recently those have been predicted to be much higher than the IPCC report suggested. So I think community resilience and localization are going to be really, really important.
Natalie, you are founder of a movement which combats plastic. Why plastic pollution became one of the biggest nightmare of the planet?
Well, I think it had been, going on. Plastic pollution has been a problem really for the last sort of 20 years, but it wasn't really until kind of 5 years ago that it became there was more awareness around it, and we started seeing more of it washing up on our beaches and in our oceans. So I think it's one of the big problems, as is industrial farming and the pollution caused from that, and climate breakdown and ocean acidification and all those things. Plastic pollution is one of those, but I think it really grabbed the headlines because it's so tangible. We can see it and hold it, and it's in our hands multiple times a day. When it's on a beach, it's really colorful and it's you can't miss it. So I felt like it was sort of like nature's calling card, really. It was unmissable, and people could really relate to that in a way that they perhaps couldn't relate to air pollution, or they couldn't relate to climate breakdown. And if they were living in a country like the UK or in the northern hemisphere, where we're not experiencing such the effects of climate breakdown at the moment. But we are, but it's not as easy to see, is what I'm trying to say. So I think plastic pollution very much grabbed the headlines, and people felt like it was something we could really do something about, and it is. And we've seen some really big changes. We've seen bans coming in. We've seen companies switching their product lines from plastic to paper, engaging more in refillable options and reusable options. So I think people felt like there were achievable things that we could do with it that perhaps felt more doable than, say, global CO2 emissions.
I find your book so interesting, How to Save the World for Free, because you basically, yes, I love it really. Unfortunately, I don't have here in my hand since I'm locked down in London. But I was reading the Netherlands where I was living before, and I really love the way you separate in a very practical way. How can people actually make changes, right? When you uh, choose the way you transport yourself, how you eat, even the bank account you choose, in the sex life. How did you start this project? Did you decided to collect all this sort of information? And it's like, okay, people should know this. Tell me more about it.
Yeah. Well, I'd been talking about plastic for 4 years at that point, like every day. Even if I was at a party, it'd be like, "Oh yeah, you're the plastic lady," and so it would be like it was constant. And I felt like just personally, I needed to be talking about something else as well. And so, kind of for my own sanity, I decided to write a book about the other environmental issues that were going on, but also because there's an overlap with plastic in a lot of the other environmental areas. So, obviously, the production of plastic increasing CO2 emissions or increasing pollution. So, I wanted to take viewers and supporters at City to See on that journey from plastic to looking at some of the other issues that they may or may not have been considering. So that was my motivation, and also I really love writing. I really love writing. So I hadn't been doing a lot of writing at City to See because I'd been busy growing the organization and campaigning, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna spend some time doing what I love and hopefully doing some good at the same time.
I think it's fascinating, the idea of write a book. Hopefully, I'm going to translate it mine as well, because the access we have to people, right? When I read your book, and I was like so captivated by the way you wrote, because it's very easy, it's very fluid, it's natural, and it's very practical. So I think when we get that feeling of reaching more people, right, and sharing our not only our feelings towards what's happening in the world, but also encourage them to take action, encourage them to rethink their life in the most basic things, the most basic details in the routine. So it's quite fascinating. And well, I tend to believe that education is key to access more people. That's why I love the book, and it's why I think when we bring awareness to people, it's an opportunity for change. But when you talk about big countries like Brazil, for instance, how they can save themselves considering the big crisis regarding the environment and the politics.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think being a white British middle class woman, I'm probably not the best person to sort of say how sort of developing countries should behave, because I know it's a difficult subject, certainly around different classes and people who've perhaps had a lower income and they're just coming out of poverty. It's not really our position, sort of as a campaigning organization, to say, right, well, you shouldn't be buying that, and you shouldn't be, having a car and driving around emitting, all sort, having a negative impact on the planet. So I think our role as a campaigning organization is to start to talk more about the intersection between social issues and environmental issues, and for us to bring more attention to how plastic pollution marginalized communities. And so it's not just about it harming dolphins and whales and albatross. Much as we love those, it's actually also harming children who are growing up near incineration plants, or they're growing up near fracking plants, and their air and their water is contaminated. So right from the beginnings of plastic, from where it's extracted and processed, to the end where it ends up being exported perhaps as recycling, but into countries that don't have infrastructure to recycle our plastic. So there's then completely unethical things happening again in marginalized communities. So I think for us, we focus on encouraging people who can to make changes in their lives, to live with less plastic, and to pioneer those products so that they become in popular culture, and so they become cheaper and more accessible. So I think that's how it can work when it's maybe is, switching to plastic free products is expensive and exclusive, but actually if we can use our privilege in that way, then it can normalize and mainstream those kinds of trends, and trends drive demand and they drive investment. So hopefully that's a way that we can support it on a global issue. I think The Story of Plastic is a really good film for people to watch. And again, in terms of educating people, it's very eye-opening to see how big corporates like Unilever and PepsiCo, like some of the biggest plastic polluters in the world, in the global north, or say in Europe, for example, their credentials are looking pretty good these days, really switching to recycled plastic, really sort of supporting deposit return schemes. They've got some good sort of targets of CO2 emissions. But you look at what they're doing in developing countries, and they're doing none of that. They are moving in on that as a growing market where they can push single-use plastics into countries where they don't have recycling facilities. So I think as change makers and people with platforms, we can shine a light on that and challenge those organizations as well.
I remember when I started as a volunteer, I was 14, working for different organizations, local organizations in my hometown. And then I started to do beach cleanup with my friends. In the beginning, we started as a group of 5 friends. And then when I saw it was like a group of 200 people, it was quite amazing to see how powerful it could be to act locally. But then I started to see that wasn't really solving the problem. I was feeling good about it because the number of people was growing, and then we were able to discuss the problem locally. And there was a time that decided to act globally, working for Greenpeace and sailing for the first time, going to the Amazon, and then from then that experience the whole world, which was quite impressive, also with Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd and other organizations. Act locally and act globally. What do you think it's the most affected when you talk to someone who is asking maybe how to start, how can I find my call? Because we both know that it's very important to, like, the fact of acting locally in a global state. So what would you say for someone who is starting now?
I think it's important to play to your strengths. So, if you're really passionate about politics and you can understand it and you can talk that language, then I think choose that lane. And whereas, if you're an artist, and actually you're more comfortable in the sort of creative realms, then choose that as your path. And so I think it's very personal. And so I don't think there's like, oh yeah, it's better to just try and tackle the global stuff, or no, it's just better to, grow veg and stay hyper local. I think it has to be about your unique gifts and just kind of working out why you're here and what is it that you can bring to the planet at this time.
And what do you think, how UK is contributing in that sense, in terms of community, in terms of rethinking life? There is a garden community I've been helping here in London, in King's Cross, which is really amazing. They have been operating since 1984. And what they do is they basically plant organic food, and they have been helping families in the neighborhood. But now with the COVID, they're also delivering food for the families affected by the virus. So what do you think in terms of initiatives UK has been developing, and how organizations can act more and do more locally?
That sounds amazing. It's so nice that you've been able to connect with that during lockdown as well. I bet it's been fantastic. There are some incredible movements. I mean, even sort of like the transition town movement, for example, that's been going for, gosh, probably more than 20 years now. What a fantastic movement that has been of, connecting and empowering communities. There are so many of those examples of people doing things to change their local communities for the better. And I think the coronavirus pandemic has really highlighted those, like you say, like that community was able to mobilize and feed people. And when at a time when our supermarkets weren't able to deal with the crisis at that speed. So I think those are really good examples of how localization is a really important thing for us to be focusing on. Our refill campaign at City to Sea has got over 350 community schemes, and for us it's just hugely important that it's enabled, you know, people to feel like they're doing something about plastic pollution, to get active in their local communities and to connect with other communities that are doing it as well, and feel like they're part of a movement, but they're acting locally, but the impact of that is very much global. So yeah, that's powered by you know, over 300 volunteers who have just, yeah, been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, this is, I think, what moves me to believe that we together, we definitely can use our skills and help each other. And in this positivity that I wanted to go, believing, sticking with positivity, that I think we can see a difference, a real difference. Usually at the end of the conversation, we ask one very special question. What is your current relationship with the planet?
It's very intimate. I have a very sort of tangible two-way relationship with the planet, I would say. So it's nice because it's screen-free time. Um, Slightly more serious, I think, because of lockdown. It meant that I was spending more time at home and in my local environment. I've got a small garden, and I built a wildlife pond. I called it like a wildlife motel, and I used an old sink, and I put an old sink in the corner of my garden and piled loads of rocks around it and underneath old rotting wood and twigs and leaves, and then piled rocks. So it created sort of space in winter for frogs and bugs, and then put some stones and water in the sink. And then 5 weeks later, I had a frog come and hang out in the motel. Um, he or she or they was my first guest, and that made me feel very happy. Just seeing life, you know, these little squiggly things appearing, and then things coming to eat the squiggly things. Hopefully, nothing coming to eat frogs.
If the ocean could hear you, what do you just tell him?
Well, I do think that the ocean can hear me, and I do feel like there's been again a two-way relationship. When I started campaigning for the ocean, I used to be completely terrified of it. I had a real phobia of the sea, and it was because of the albatross that I started campaigning for cleaner oceans. It wasn't because I loved the oceans, because I was completely terrified of the ocean. So through that process, though, and through the initial crowdfunding campaign, I had a very profound, kind of mystical experience that's unexplainable, but essentially the sea did reach out back to me and healed that part of me that was scared of it. So by putting my energy into the oceans and being of service to it, it gave me something back, and healed a part of me.
Wow, very powerful.
Yeah, it's quite a it's a you know it's a lovely story, and there's quite a lot to it, but you know, I don't know how cosmic your listeners are, so you know, if anyone wants to hear more, they can get in touch.
Well, lovely, Natalie. Thank you so much for your time here with us. May actions like yours from your movement and can really transform the world. I'm very happy to have you around, talk with you, hear you, and read your books. Please write another one for us.
I'll ask you, what would it be? I really appreciate being here, and thank you for speaking to me in English. I'm sorry I can't speak in your native tongue, but I really appreciate your support and your work in the world as well.
So have a
Thanks.
lovely day.
See
Ciao.
ya. Good
See
luck with the move.
you.